There is a passage in the New Testament that most Christians have never noticed or questioned. Jude, verse 14, the apostle writes, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones. Wait, Enoch prophesied? Where is this prophecy? It is not in Genesis. It is not in any book of the Old Testament that you know. Jude is quoting a book that existed, a book that the first Christians read, a book that later disappeared. Why? What was in those pages that led later communities to exclude it from the biblical canon? And most importantly, if an apostle considered Enoch worthy of quotation in Scripture, why can't we read his book in most modern Bibles? Today, we are going to investigate the Book of Enoch, and when you discover what is written there, you will understand why it became one of the most controversial texts in religious history. To understand the book, first we need to understand the man. Enoch appears in Genesis chapter 5. In one of the genealogies of the Bible, verse after verse repeats the same pattern. So-and-so lived so many years, had sons and daughters, and then he died. But when we reach Enoch, something changes. Enoch lived 65 years and fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God 300 years, and he was not, for God took him. He did not die. Out of the billions who have lived, only 2 in the Bible did not experience death in the usual way, Enoch and Elijah. This detail is not accidental. It signals something extraordinary. Enoch was the 7th patriarch from Adam. In Hebrew symbolism, 7 represents completeness. Everything about him carries symbolic weight. And here is another crucial detail. Enoch lived before the flood. He witnessed the antediluvian world, the world before Noah. According to the book that bears his name, Enoch was not merely a silent observer. He was the scribe of heaven, a prophet who received visions of judgment, the man who saw angels fall. Now we reach the heart of the mystery. What is in Enoch's book that made it so controversial? The answer begins with 2 mysterious verses in Genesis 6. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Genesis mentions this briefly and moves on. Enoch does not. According to the Book of Enoch, 200 angels, called Watchers, descended to Mount Hermon. They made a pact, an oath of rebellion. Their leader was called Shemhaza. They knew it was wrong. They knew there would be consequences, but they did it anyway. They took human women as wives. The text lists the names of 20 leading watchers, including Azazel, names that later traditions associate with fallen angels. But the transgression was not only their union. It was what they taught. Azazel taught humans to forge swords and weapons, the art of war. He taught the use of cosmetics and adornment. Other watchers taught sorcery, astrology, and secret knowledge. And then the Nephilim were born, giants, hybrids. The text describes them in exaggerated, symbolic language, enormous beings who devoured everything. Violence filled the earth. Creation itself was corrupted. According to Enoch, this corruption led to the flood. But the story continues. The archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, were sent to intervene. Raphael was commanded to bind Azazel in darkness. Gabriel was sent to destroy the giants. Michael imprisoned the rebellious leaders until the day of final judgment. Enoch describes visiting these imprisoned beings. They begged him to intercede. The answer was no. Judgment was certain. The book then turns to visions of the future. Enoch speaks of a coming Son of Man who will judge the wicked and vindicate the righteous, language that later appears in the Gospels. He describes books of judgment being opened, resurrection, final reckoning, themes that echo strongly in Revelation. Enoch also includes astronomical sections describing the movements of heavenly bodies. He presents a prophetic timeline known as the parable of the weeks, dividing history into symbolic eras. For many, this was too mystical, too elaborate, too speculative. So why was the Book of Enoch excluded from most biblical canons? By the 4th century, church councils applied criteria for inclusion: apostolic authority, widespread use, and doctrinal consistency. Enoch did not meet these standards universally. It lacked clear apostolic authorship. It was not accepted everywhere. Its angelic cosmology raised theological questions. Yet the story does not end there. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved the Book of Enoch as scripture. To this day, it remains in their biblical canon. In 1773, the Scottish explorer James Bruce brought copies of the Ethiopian text back to Europe. Later, in 1947, fragments of Enoch were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, dated before the time of Christ. This confirmed that the book was ancient. It was read during the Second Temple period. It shaped the worldview of certain Jewish communities, and it influenced New Testament language. Peter speaks of angels imprisoned in darkness. Paul refers to principalities and powers. Jesus uses the title Son of Man. The echoes are there. So why does this matter? Because the Book of Enoch opens a window into how many Jews in Jesus' time understood evil, angels, judgment, and cosmic conflict. Even if one does not consider it scripture, it remains historically significant. It helps us understand the intellectual and spiritual environment of early Christianity. Should it be considered inspired scripture? That depends on one's tradition. But it is undeniably one of the most fascinating ancient religious texts ever written. Enoch, the man who walked with God and did not see death, left behind a testimony, a vision of rebellion, of judgment, of redemption. And whether one accepts it as sacred canon or ancient literature, one thing is certain. The Book of Enoch continues to provoke questions. And perhaps that is why, despite centuries of debate, it still speaks. Some voices are difficult to silence. The question is, are we willing to listen?